Hello, welcome everybody. Welcome to Give Live. I'm Amanda Gorman, Director of Customer Success at Stellar WP and Give WP. I'm looking forward to this conversation today as we dig into Universal Analytics and GA4 and understanding the new data model. So I'm excited for everyone to be here and for lots of learning to happen today. I'm going to welcome Kevin today. Kevin Peters serves as the Chief Technology Officer at NextAfter and as a Chief Digital Strategist for many different nonprofits they serve. Kevin's background in data science and digital marketing allows Kevin to work with NextAfter clients to create long-term fundraising strategies that are more efficient and successful. Welcome, Kevin. We're so happy to have you here. Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. Thanks so much for the kind intro. So as mentioned, Kevin Peters, I've been with NextAfter for the last 10 years, working with organizations ranging from those making $1 million to those making $100 million. And really what we focused on is largely in the digital realm, which involves a lot of what we're going to talk about today, which is digital tracking, how to better measure our ROI, how to help our clients get more with less oftentimes. I personally live here in Frisco, Texas, which is in the North Dallas area. Yeah, it's a good start.
Awesome. Well, super glad to have you here. And I just got a couple housekeeping notes to let everyone know, and then we'll dive into the conversation. We will have a question and answer session towards the end of today's stream. You can drop your questions in the chat box, and any of our moderator will pin them to the Q&A portion of the conversation. Also, this is live stream, and it will be available as a recording immediately on YouTube. And that includes the chat. So no need to take notes. You'll be able to revisit the conversation at any time. All right, let's go ahead and dive in. So before we dig into some of the finer details of Google sunsetting Universal Analytics and moving to GA4, I know that NextAfter has been a pivotal part of helping their nonprofit clients set up their GA4 platforms. Would you mind telling us a little bit more about that process in general, how NextAfter serves their clients?
Sure. So I mentioned NextAfter is a digital fundraising and optimization firm, and really we like to think of ourselves as three different companies within one. We have our consultancy that we work with about 50 different nonprofits here in the industry. We also have what we consider our research lab, where we're working with both clients directly as then well doing kind of industry type surveys to understand what works, what doesn't in the digital space. Sometimes that involves doing a lot of A/B experiments where we show landing page A to 50%, landing page B to 50%, and then measure the impact on conversion, whether that be donations, email subscribers, page engagement, whatever the case may be. Or we do a lot of what's called mystery donor studies, where we'll go out to anywhere from 50 to 500 organizations and put ourselves in the mind of the donor. We go through the process to understand what's it like to give a gift? How hard is it to give a gift? It's surprisingly hard to give a gift on a lot of different websites. You really got to want it sometimes, but we try to publish that and get that information out. And that's where the third kind of aspect of our company comes in, which is our institute, which is where we try to consolidate what we learn with the clients that we're doing work with directly, those that we do our mystery donors with, and try to create trainings, create guides, do anything we can to help them further those missions, just because it's the work nonprofits are doing is so incredibly important. In terms of the Google Analytics and what we're talking about here, I'm a firm believer that as an optimization firm, you can't optimize what you can't measure. One of the first projects we do with just about every single nonprofit we serve is a tracking optimization. Most people will have Google Analytics installed on their website. I think probably July 1, a lot of people are going to lose Google Analytics on their website if they don't take some actions. But what often is happening is they've installed the out of the box and it's either wrong, or it's tracking things incorrectly. There's a lot of different ways it can go wrong. And they're not taking full advantage. They may know how many people are on page A, but they don't know who those people are. They don't know what actions get derived from it. So we'll go through, we enhance the tracking simply by, we'll talk through some of this today, adding additional events. Not only is it important to know where revenue comes from, that's critical, but it's also important to know where do your email subscribers come from. If I'm doing social media ads, a lot of people put the Facebook pixel on their site, but they don't often think through what else do I need to add in order to get the most out of my advertising? And so we add conversion optimization, things like that to the efforts.
Absolutely. It sounds like it's really taking this holistic approach to fundraising online, of course. And this data is really what I understand to be what tells that story ultimately for making decisions year over year for different campaigns that a nonprofit might be running throughout the year. Kind of comparing metrics from what happened last year can be really beneficial for planning for the future.
Absolutely. I mean, we see this so often is a lot of times people have the data, but don't really know what to do with it. Again, they put the website on there, but it's surprising that if you use the data correctly, it can really be transformative for organizations. We were working with an NPR, a local NPR station. Their focus was largely on the region they were serving up in the Northeast. And when we first did an analysis for them, we were able to show them that 70% of their traffic was coming from outside their region. NPR is kind of they work in different models where they're working in their individual regions. And when you look at their website, the number one thing they were promoting was a local guide for getting more out of such and such area. Well, 70% of the audience didn't care about that. And so a simple shift in realizing, helping them see the content you're making is bigger than just the region you are existing in, helped us reshape that offer. We moved it towards something that was a little bit more evergreen, a little bit more broader. And we went from having an email acquisition rate of 0.1% to an email acquisition rate of 2%, meaning 200% increase the number of people who are wanting to hear from them on a regular, daily, weekly basis.
That's amazing.
That one, yeah, it's cool, but that's the kind of thing the data can lead to. It's not just how many people are on what pages. It should drive interest.
Absolutely. Like actually truly meeting your donors where they are and knowing what that means.
And even to that part, that's where we're going to get in. I think we'll talk a little bit more on GA4 and how it differs. But one of the biggest limitations that's existed with the old tracking systems like Universal Analytics, which was, people call it GA3, is I could know what my website visitors were doing. I couldn't know what my donors were doing online because there wasn't a great way for me to track a donor across their session without using an outside tool, without helping understand what this individual segment, because yes, I know what a donor did when they gave a gift, but I don't know when the donor doesn't give a gift what they're doing because I can't identify them as a donor historically. Now we can. And so that helped us again shape. I think most every nonprofit is going to have a newsletter. They're going to have something they want to tell their subscribers, and they're going to have something they probably want to tell a little bit differently to their donors. Well, if you know what your donors are looking at, that should help shape the conversations that they're having and help adapt your outgoing communications to match what their interests are.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So let's get into that a little bit. There are many enhancements in the new GA4 platform, and I wonder if we can speak a little bit more to some of that information and how that's going to differ, and like how nonprofits are going to be able to leverage that data and information to make data informed decisions.
Sure. So Google Analytics, the actual one we're using today, launched in 2005. Fun fact, like literally just about every website out there is optimizing, making their database recommendations based on a platform that was written when I graduated college, which that alone, since I'm one of the oldest on our staff, should tell you just how out of date that technology is. They've kept it limping along. So kudos to Google for keeping it there. But there's so many, it's based on an outdated framework. So much of what Universal Analytics was based on was what pages are people looking at and how long are they engaging on it, things like that. But the reality is we don't just care about pages anymore. I mean, there aren't too many processes, whether it's an email sign-up process, whether it's a donation process, whether it's whatever the case may be, that usually these days involves one page. It's multiple steps on a single page. Using Universal Analytics couldn't really do that very well. It's cobbled together at best, but it didn't give you the level of insight you need. I'll give you one example. We just did an analysis with one of our clients. And with the new GA4, we were able to set up additional tracking on their donation form. It's a single page. We're driving traffic from an email to their page. We want to understand where is the opportunity for optimization on this page, but short of you can do screen recordings and maybe get lucky and see where people are struggling. We had to add additional tracking. We had to add individual events that told us, did they page load? Yes or no? Simple. Did they get to the donation form? Did they click the donation amount button? Did they fill in their information? Did they fill out the credit card? Did they press the submit button? And where did the fall off end up happening? Well, what that led to is actually we realized that shockingly 10% of people that clicked on the submit button never actually gave a transaction. They made it through the form. They clicked the amount they wanted to give. They gave me their credit card information, but they never actually finished. They pressed it, and due to an error that was happening, sometimes it was due to they filled out the form and decided maybe not, or they would have issues with their browsers. But that's the kind of insight you couldn't get out of Universal Analytics. We didn't know where people were falling off. It was a technical issue. It wasn't a value issue. They wanted to give, they just couldn't. So the Google Analytics 4 is allowing us to do that kind of in-depth reporting. It gives us that level of flexibility. I can actually, for nonprofits that have web apps, in addition to like iPhone apps, Android apps, you can track users across both of those, which is, I think we're talking about a small percentage of nonprofits, but it's for those that have it, it's helpful. The other big issue and the big thing, and you see it all in the news, is the privacy additions that they're adding to it. So Google Analytics 4 is moving away from cookies, and I think Chrome and Safari have already said they're going to be getting rid of those themselves in the near future. So any tracking that involves those is out of the just can't be done anymore. For those that don't know what a cookie is, it's a little tiny piece of file that's saved on your browser that tells Google who you are. With that going away, it undermined a lot of the ways Google used to track. But the other big thing is it allows you to handle the management of that data. So for your international clients, the GDPR requirements that come along with privacy, the ability to delete data, GA3 couldn't really do it well. GA4 can now with the click of a button. And the bigger thing is it's built on the next generation, machine learning. I mean, AI is all we talk about now. And you can actually do it with GA4. GA3 used to try to pretend like they could, but most of that was just not very useful.
Totally. Awesome. Thank you. So getting into the Google Universal Platform that's going to be sunset in just about a week from now on July 1st, which means anyone that's using UA must make the switch to GA4 if they haven't already. Can you help us understand why Google is sunsetting Universal Analytics and introducing GA4 as their new analytics platform?
A lot of it built on, it's like we mentioned, the software is so out of date at this point. They've been maintaining something that's long been needing to be sunset. And they want to be able to focus their efforts on what the next big thing is. And since they're not really actively developing that, they want to push it over to the new platform. The good news is, well, good or bad, depending on if you've logged into your Google Analytics in the last, call it 3 months, you're getting hounded by a giant pop-up that looks like the world is about to end, and they actually give you a countdown timer for when the world is about to end. For those that don't take action that they consider action, they're actually going to make different properties for people and shift the data so it's moving over to the next generation. So the good news is those that don't shift automatically, depending on your configurations and your setup, they will shift them for you. It's going to cause problems, I think, too. But the other bigger reason is just so they can adapt where the world is moving. I mean, we can't keep doing things the way the world was tracked back in 2005 just because it's not as useful for the people anymore. And they're trying to stay relevant to everything else that they have going on in terms of the additional advertising, the privacy focus, the machine learning, and trying to gain better insights than just the old way of looking at the world.
Absolutely. And it sounds like getting ahead of this change rather than having Google just do it for you has a lot of benefits because you can really be proactive in the way that your reporting is going to look. Because I'm assuming that if they're doing it for you, there's a lot of assumptions that they're going to be making. And if you have any custom reports in Google Analytics, I'm not sure how that translates.
Yeah, if you have custom reports in Google Analytics, they don't translate anyway. That's Google Analytics 4, and this is probably a good point to talk through this a little bit. It's odd as it sounds, it's a radical shift in the way we think about reporting. We used to think about things in terms of a session, meaning me as a user, what do I do when I come to your website? Instead, though, I think, especially for nonprofits, we have questions about what a person does when they come to the website, but we don't view individual users based on how did they get to my website and then what did they do on this one time. I want to understand them as a user. What's pulling people back? What's the original source? But then how do they come back later? I want to understand them and individual activities on the site, not just what pages did they view. How much of my video did they watch? What part of the donation form did they start? Did they sign up and download my newsletter or whatever my offer is? And Google Analytics 4 is now shifting to what they call event-based, where it's not what page am I looking at, what event am I doing? Now, a page view is a type of event, but we can also get into signups. I can also understand the full checkout process, not just did they finish, did they make a donation, did they start the donation? If I have a multi-step donation form, do they start the process? Do they add things to my cart if I have an e-commerce site as part of my platform? And so it's a radical shift that's a little bit, and this is, our agency has about 50 employees. It's been a lot of education because you have to rethink the way you approach analytics. It's not based on the session. It should be based on the person. And that's what Google Analytics 4 is kind of their approach is.
I love that. And it really does speak to that holistic kind of approach that we were talking about earlier, that we really want to be looking at our users or donors in this scenario, really holistically, and understanding their personality, understanding every little bit about them that we can get from them to be able to make informed decisions and then have great storytelling going on the website with all of that data. So this seems to be like one of the main enhancements, this event approach kind of process. So we wanted to kind of talk about the user interface as well, and how it's a little bit more streamlined for users. Can you tell us how the new user interface can benefit organizations additionally?
Candidly, the new user interface isn't great. I say that I'll say it this way. Google Analytics 4 was built largely for people like me, people that are in the data on a daily basis that are wanting to dig deep. Now, there are benefits to all types of users, but when you get into it, some of the simplicity of the site that exists today is a benefit. You go to the old Universal Analytics, everyone knows where the reports were that they wanted to understand. It was laid out for them, but there's also a whole lot of reports they probably didn't ever need. I mean, I used Universal Analytics for a better part of my career, and there's still sites that are pages in there that I've never even bothered clicking on, other than to say, I can't remember what this is anymore. And so they've reduced the number of reports out of the box just to those that they felt are the most commonly asked, but also the most relevant. But the other thing that they've kind of brought with it is they've helped you understand that websites don't exist in a vacuum. A great proportion of the nonprofit industry probably has their main website, but then they've also built out maybe a resources hub, or they host their donation process on a different site entirely. And it might change domains, it might change whatever. Universal Analytics with that kind of setup required multiple views, and it was hard to stitch together what does someone look at on one website, and then how does that lead to actions on the other. We were working with one organization that had 50 different websites and actively being managed and developed. But with that scope and size, they had no idea what website A did for website C. And so the good part of Google Analytics 4 is it does span across websites very easily by getting rid of views and let you track all of them to the same property and then be able to dig into the websites if you want to. The other big thing, and this is where it's become nice, really, depending, because you can customize it to your own needs. It's flexibility. What they've made and where they've shifted their focus is into building your own custom reports. So I mentioned NextAfter works with about 50 nonprofits. I can think of, there's not too many that have the same basic flow for their donations. Everybody does it a little bit differently. Everybody cares about it a little bit different emphasis. Maybe they want recurring on this side. This one's really looking for upgrades. So this one, because of that nuances. And that's within a niche of a niche. We're talking about the nonprofit industry and then individual verticals within it. And even they have different needs. So they've built out a set of reporting structures that allow you to create funnel reports, tables, views, charts, whatever the case may be, that lets you identify whether it's out of the box events, custom events that you've built yourself, helps you create visualizations that allow you to get to the answers you care about, save it, and then share it. Now, Universal Analytics had something like that, but nowhere near as powerful given the way it was set up with pages and everything else. So it's been nice that we can build out the kind of reporting we need for each individual client these days.
Absolutely. And I know that GA4 has a lot of these out of the box template reports that are customizable, but I wonder about like the skill set that's required for that. Like the typical nonprofit I know has very limited resources. A lot of the folks that I work with at GiveWP are trying to give up quickly to get a fundraising project going in like the next week to 4 weeks. And oftentimes Google Analytics is kind of like an afterthought. And I know that's why it's awesome that NextAfter is here and like folks like yourself are working with nonprofits. But I wonder, like for the average user, like what is the learning curve for working with some of these templates? Are these templates helpful to the average user? And what are like the advancements that can be made maybe with some additional support?
It depends on the type of user. I'm not going to say that these are the most easy to use tools because candidly, they're not. I mean, a lot of us are used to using Excel to get the answers we need, or just having it shown to us without having to dig. This requires a little bit of extra effort. But if there's a nonprofit that has somebody where their focus is, whether it's marketing, it might be broad-based fundraising, they might have to do all those different things. But I would assume somebody like that is going to need to understand data. And so it's the type of reporting that you can spend a few hours to get an understanding of what I'm looking at. And then from there, it becomes second nature. So it's relatively straightforward in the user interface, but it does require a bit of a learning curve to understand what data exists. And then more importantly, and I always emphasize this with my data analysts, it's not necessarily what data exists, what questions need to be answered. What are the questions you have? And then let's figure out how we can build the reports, or most likely find reports out of the box that answer those questions for us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Having those questions, first of all, is crucial because otherwise just looking at data for data's sake isn't really going to get you very far, I imagine.
Right. Yeah, no. And that's, there's an old adage that I can make data tell you anything. Just a matter of, it's not the way it should be run. That's the way it can be run, unfortunately.
Yes, sure. Awesome. So next up here, we've got one thing that is particularly important for any e-commerce based business, which nonprofits are, is audience segmentation. What enhancements have been made in segmenting capabilities as it relates to the behavior and interactions of website visitors?
So there's a couple things that GA4 does that GA3 didn't, and I think they've kind of taken this to heart. One deals with the marketing side of things. When your metrics, when the things you care about are user engagement, when the things you care about are getting people to dig deeper into your mission, GA4 does a great job of measuring stickiness. They actually call it that. There's like users that engage, come back, and stay engaged. It gives deeper understanding of engagement metrics. So there is an old a metric used in Universal Analytics called time on site. People believe time on site represented how long are people actually on my website. Based on the name and title, you would think that's what it means, but it's actually not what it means. Time on site was saying if somebody looks at more than one page, how long are they on the site? And so it disproportionately inflated my engagement if somebody never went past a single site, or a single page on that site. So they have created segments that allow you to see, of my sticky users, of those coming back, what do they engage with? What keeps them coming back? And that should help drive your marketing to say, what should I drive people to? They've also got some deeper Google Ads integrations for those using, whether it's the Google Grant. I actually can't use the segments in Google Grant. If you're using paid Google advertising, Google Grant, for those that don't know, is the free $10,000 that Google gives nonprofits. The downside is it comes with some pretty significant limitations on what kind of advertising you can show, but paid Google advertising with this kind of integration will allow you to remarket to people, remarket not just to people who saw my site, but certain types of people that are displaying activities that I care about, whether it's engagement with an email newsletter, reading news articles, or donating. And the other big thing is it allows you is you can create custom segments in the admin, relatively straightforward, that are based on activities a person does that lets them stay in that segment moving forward. So the first thing we set up with all of our clients is a donor segment. People who have given a transaction in the last year. That way we can monitor what are people in the donor segment doing when they're on my website. And we want to cater our communications to what our donors care about. And that's one way we can find it out without having to directly ask them.
Absolutely. It's really amazing, all these improvements and just what's really possible now. And it really is lining up exactly with the technology as we need it to be, as folks are trying to really streamline their efforts. So cross-platform tracking has been a bit of a hot topic, especially after Apple rolled out the ability to opt out of tracking. Tracking is important because it delivers targeted content to the viewer. How does GA4 differ from Universal Analytics as it relates to cross-platform tracking?
So let me first define there's a couple of different cross words that people use that they often use interchangeably. So cross-platform would involve somebody that is on my website and then jumps over to my app that we've built for the iPhone. GA4 is the first time that you can actually track and understand this person is here, this person is here, and this is what they do regardless of what environment they're interacting with. GA4, Universal Analytics, that wasn't possible. It is with GA4. Now, I will say, I think it's a small proportion of nonprofits that have the problem of, I have all my different apps that I've made, and I need to know what they're doing on my website. Like, interesting, but probably not the most applicable. They do have recently, though, they've tried to make it easier and I think this is relevant for nonprofits, those who have multiple websites. I mentioned this before. We used to have multiple properties or views, depending on the nomenclature used. But they now make it easy for me to say, here are all the domains that I own and I'm going to track to. Then when someone on domain A jumps over to domain B, it automatically continues their session for them and helps me track and understand who that person is without knowing about it, having to manually transfer it like you used to in the past. It's one of those out-of-the-box features that used to require a lot of actual technical expertise. You needed a developer to set it up correctly. Now a marketer can do it. I mean, depending on the tools they have in their box, though. But a marketer would be able to set this up because it's all based on the user interface, which is a nice little improvement.
Right. And I got to imagine that helps, just streamline someone's energy, effort, looking at reports for volunteers or folks in a nonprofit organization that is trying to get their feet wet with data. Having it all centralized into one place is so crucial so that you're not feeling like you're so, diluted into all these different platforms that you've got to understand for different various website domains.
The other thing is it prevents bad data. Too often we spend our wheels making marketing campaigns, writing content based on what I think is happening. And too often it's because we forgot to add a comma, or I have a tracking script in my site twice. It's a technical issue, but it leads to real world time wasted. And very few nonprofits have the staff to be able to waste that time. And we're limited on our resources. We have to make the best with what we have. And so hopefully this should make that a little bit easier for people just out of the box without having to do too much efforts.
Absolutely. Speaking of just specific things that nonprofits should be looking out for, GA4 comes with default configuration options, but there's a wide variety of customizations available. What are some of the new features and settings that a nonprofit should adjust?
The biggest one that we see that are going to be an issue for people very soon is what they call the data retention. Google Analytics 3 is going to be going away come in July. You'll be able to access that data. Now, one thing we've been asked, that data is not going to be moved into GA4. There's going to be two separate properties. So it's going to become a challenge over time to rebuild your history. But the first thing that Google did is they set what they call the data retention, how long they're going to store your data, to 2 months, which means if I wanted to track my donors and what they're doing on my site, After 2 months, if somebody gave a gift, I'm not going to know about it. And so they leave that segment. But it's a simple settings adjustment that you can set data retention from 2 months to 14 months. You can't set it indefinitely like you could with UA, but it's a simple modification that should allow you to monitor those people longer term. Another one is, so if I install the script on my site, pretty easy, whether I have Tag Manager, WordPress, whatever the case is, it's pretty easy to add on that tracking script. But it comes with basic events. It'll track scroll, like how long someone scrolls on your site, what pages they view. I know WP Give has a e-commerce tracking as well as an option that they can do. But one thing that we find that isn't tracked very often that I think should are signups. The lifeblood of a nonprofit is oftentimes the size and quality of their email file. If I'm relying on Google to send me traffic, or I'm relying on Facebook to send me traffic, I become at the whims of those large organizations and their algorithms, that if they make an algorithmic shift, it can be catastrophic for nonprofits. And so by building a large email file, they become in control of their own destiny, but we don't spend the time and effort to monitor where are those people coming from, who are signing up, how often are they signing up, and then being able to optimize for that activity. And so tracking signups is another big thing. Last thing, this one gets a little bit more technical, but because everything in Google Analytics 4 is event-based, Google's willing to give you all of that data for free. You just have to push it to a very specific source, and that's one called BigQuery. It's an easy connection. It allows you to basically back up your analytics data so that even if it gets deleted after 2 months, 14 months, you still retain it indefinitely. And so that's something now, as people are in GA3, that they're realizing that they don't own their data. It's going away. That puts them in a predicament of, what do I do moving forward to optimize my efforts?
Absolutely. Absolutely. A lot of things to consider for sure. And I feel like this is a good time for folks to really take Google Analytics more seriously if they haven't already, to use this as an opportunity to get to know the new platform and to utilize it for better reporting now that there's all these new different features that they're able to really tap into. And I just loved your comment on the signups, because I think that is such an underrated focus for nonprofits. You know, there's a lot of focus around the call to actions towards getting folks to contribute. But those signups are really an opportunity to nurture a community and an audience, and to really make the impact felt across their community.
Well, and I've always found it funny. The first thing most nonprofits do when I get to their website is they ask me for a gift. I would equate that to, if the first time I meet a person, if I meet a girl in a bar, the first thing I do is ask her to marry me. I mean, that's the equivalent. It's usually a courtship. So let's start by exchanging our information, and then we'll build trust and we'll build a relationship over time. That's what email capture allows us to do. If we focus as much on providing value to them, the donation becomes second nature. It's easy at that point.
Exactly. You have to feel connected to the giving process in order for it to be something that's going to be beneficial to the nonprofit over the long term. So shifting gears a little bit, it wouldn't be 2023 if there wasn't a conversation about AI in pretty much every tech-related situation these days. With GA4, there are AI-driven insights. How does GA4 leverage AI and machine learning in the new platform?
Thankfully, Google Analytics 4 does not have ChatGPT, or otherwise most of the stats it would give you would be made up. Crazy the amount of information that system spits out, but you're right.
Totally.
Now, the great news about the event-based thing is it does allow it to actually incorporate AI in ways that it never could. That's like saying, hey, here's engaged people, or being able to create lookalike models in your Google ads to say, go track those. But the biggest impact that AI is having in GA4 right now is the fall off that's coming from tracking. This is especially powerful for the organizations we work with that are in Europe and the places where GDPR is becoming a factor. For those that don't know, GDPR is a privacy laws enacted in the EU many years back now at this point that required people to be like opt in. That's where the banners for do you accept these cookies came from, things like that. Well, what they're seeing in the EU is that they can track maybe 30% of their traffic at best, because the other 70% are saying, I don't want that tracking. And so what Google has done is they can now use AI to model out traffic and conversions for those that don't actually opt in to it. So whether that's good or bad is yet to be determined, because a computer may not always know what actual conversions are. But it's also important for the nonprofits here in the US to know this information too, because we're actually seeing, we did a pretty in-depth exhaustive study, because it goes back a little bit, a year and a half ago, we realized our reporting was off. Now, Google Analytics will always have reporting that's never 100% accurate. That's just the reality of Google. We always used to say, if I'm within 5 to 10% of accuracy in e-commerce, then I'm doing okay. It's meant to be directional. I would never go report to my board the number of the dollars raised from Google Analytics. Like, you pull that from your donation form. But we realized we were not just off by 10, 15, like 5, 10%. We were off by 25% in terms of the amount of revenue. So we thought it was a problem with tracking. We thought it was a problem with the website. Without getting into the nitty gritty, it turns out 25% of our users were blocking our tracking. They are adding plugins to Google Chrome, to Safari, that would prevent Google Analytics from even reporting. And so GA4 is able to help overcome that with some of their modified and their AI and their model conversions. But it's also, take it with a grain of salt, though, because that means I'm not always getting the full picture of what's actually happening on my website. I know what Google thinks is happening, not necessarily what is happening, which ends up being kind of a little catch-22. We get data, but it might be real, is the end result on that one.
Yeah, I feel like that can trip people up, and it is a very important consideration that there are assumptions being made on Google's end about the data that they're interpreting. Absolutely.
We see this especially with when we're using Google Ads. Google Ads has shifted a lot of their efforts into what they call modeled conversions. And so I would log into one of our Google Ads accounts, and it would show that we raised $50,000 last month, which is great. Love that. Then I log into my WordPress site to look at the donation form, and it says we raised $35,000. The problem is Google is doing modeled conversions, not just real conversions, because anyone that's enabled privacy settings on their phone now no longer track accurately, so they have to guess. That's the only way they're going to be able to optimize and move forward on it, which is not a great place to be in, but it's the reality of where we live today. So it's better to adapt than try to fight against it. Just know the pitfalls and know what to look for.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Being informed is so crucial. We had a Give Live recently with Termageddon, all about nonprofit privacy laws, and there's a link for that in the chat. So if anybody's interested in learning more just about managing nonprofit privacy laws, that's a super important conversation to dig into.
It's becoming more so too with the CCPA. Individual states are starting to pass their own individual laws, and it's a lot of fun. Good times in the privacy world these days.
It's a lot to manage, and it's definitely important. You don't want to find yourself in a position where you wish you would have considered these things before.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay, so now the biggest piece of the puzzle is making the switch from Universal Analytics to GA4. In NextAfter's guide, which I'll have in the chat, Kimber will be dropping in the chat, you do a really good job of walking folks through how to set up the GA4 account. Before we move on to creating reports, how can you give our viewers any best practices or helpful hints to make the transition as smooth as possible?
I'd say it this way: something's better than nothing. The guide that we wrote, written by my brilliant vice president of analytics, it is long because there is a lot of things you can do. Step one, start tracking something. Figure out what questions you want to answer and track more if you need to. A lot of the configurations, a lot of the settings can be done in the admin, but it feels intimidating to learn an entirely new software. So I always just recommend start somewhere, do a little something, and then build upon it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Something is better than nothing.
That's right.
Love that. Again, that link is in the chat, so make sure that you check that out. That's extremely helpful, as it'll walk you through creating custom events as well. We don't necessarily have the time today to get into the nuances of that, but I wanted to ask you, which reports do you think are the most valuable to nonprofits and should be set up right away?
One of the first to set up is probably going to be your funnel. I've never been a big fan of the analogy of the funnel. It's the premise that traffic is falling down to the website. The reality is we don't have 100% conversion. We have a 1% conversion. People are falling out of our funnel, not into it. But it does give you an understanding of what does it take to go from start to donation. Because in order to optimize something, you have to better understand where the gaps exist. And so setting up, they have a funnel visualization in there that you can set up all the different steps that I know they have to go to this page, and then they have to start this form, and then they complete it. You can build that out so it tells you. It can also tell you what traffic and how it varies based on where they're coming in at. Another thing that's worth noting on this one, when nonprofits switch from GA3 to GA4, it resets all of their data. So on day one, you are going to have 100% new users because GA4 didn't know who they were again. And so it's just good to have that analogy, and the sooner you can get it set up, the better. That way, when I look at it a year from now, my data will be more accurate. If I look at it a month from now, it's just approach it with the knowledge that it still is learning, it's still getting new information for those individuals.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So moving on a little bit, NextAfter hosts the Nio Summit, which Nio stands for Nonprofit Innovation and Optimization. There's a lot of value in the sessions, actually. Bradley's session on recurring donations inspired Camber actually to write a pitch that's leading to a really exciting update. We can't tell you about it just yet, but it's leading to some really good stuff within the GiveWP team. It will be coming to our recurring donations add-on soon. Kevin, I wonder if you can tell us a little bit more about this year's Nio Summit.
Sure. Nio Summit, it's one of, I mentioned that we're one of three things. This is the institute aspect of it, where we used to go to a lot of nonprofit summits or a lot of nonprofit conferences, and it felt like never felt genuine. It felt like people were trying to sell us more than they were trying to actually contribute. We also went to a lot of conferences in the for-profit space, and you see some amazing speakers there. You see people who are in-depth and knowledgeable about copywriting, that those concepts apply to nonprofits too. And so this occurred, I think, I can't remember what year we're on, 6 or 7 years ago, where we decided we wanted to host our own. It started with I think we had 125 people come that first year. We tried to bring the best speakers that we could, regardless of the industry. We have people who are, Brady Josephson from Charity Water gave the recurring donor speech. He was brilliant at it. We had people from Conversion XL. That's the kind of a world-renowned optimization that, while they don't work with nonprofits, they can certainly teach us something about ways to optimize our own efforts. And so we try to bring them together into one big show. This year, we're hosting it in Dallas. It's at the end of September. We're hoping for about 1,000 individuals, 1,000 attendees to be coming. It's also not like a normal conference. It's a lot of fun. A lot of games. This year's theme is, we always try to do different themes. We've done Greatest Showman. We've done, trying to think of some of our past themes in the past. But this year it's a game show theme. We're actually giving away a car, which I learned a couple weeks ago, which is crazy to me that we would buy a car and give it away. But you got to do fun things to get people to stay to the very end.
I love it. I love it. Yeah, I think there was a Wizard of Oz theme.
Yep, the Wizard of Oz. That was last year. That one.
Love that.
We had that one out in Kansas City, strikingly enough. And it's interesting. It turns out you can hire people, you can hire actors to, well, go back to, we did a Willy Wonka theme one year, and it turned out we could hire an entire acting troupe to walk around as Oompa Loompas the entire conference. It's fun what you get to do. Control.
I love that. How much fun. I love it. Sounds great.
But
and
also,
Kevin and the team at
content. I always emphasize the fun because that's what I love at it. But the content's also, it's amazing what people pull away from that.
Oh, of course. Of course. Of course. A perfect pair. I love it. Well, Kevin and the team at NextAfter have been kind enough to offer a discount code to GiveWP users. So we'll drop that registration link and discount code into the chat. And that'll be in there soon as we move on to Q&A.
Thank you.
Awesome. So I believe we had some questions. Yep, there we go. One on the screen here. So I recently saw a tweet that insinuated that eventually Google Analytic properties would get bought up by a platform like Phantom. What's the likelihood that would happen?
I don't see it big. The reality is Google makes some money off their marketing platform, GA360. It's not enough that it's earth shattering to Google. The reality, that's true. But if you want to know where Google does make its money, it's advertising. And I can't imagine the reason their advertising is so successful is because they have access to all of the data from all of the websites of the entire world. And so for the amount of sale that they would get with a GA4 to a Fathom seems unlikely in the grand scheme of what they make from Google Ads and the tight integration that owning both properties gives them. So I'm not going to say it's never going to happen. It just doesn't seem a likely output, given all that they have riding on the advertising side of things.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Awesome. Another question here, is there a resource available to learn more about how to properly use GA4?
We have, so the guide that was dropped in here, and NextAfter also has a course that we sponsored with the brilliant analytics guru named Chris Mercer that walks through a very practical application of GA4, how to build reports, what ports exist out of the box. And we had him kind of reshape his normal training so it applies to nonprofits. That's part of kind of our training and institute side of things. And I believe we usually have a free membership option for sign up that people would be able to take that course within the first 30 days. And for if it has a cost, minimal cost.
Amazing. And that guide is in the chat now. So you'll be able to see that course with the free trial for NextAfter membership right there. How important is it to measure perform data? I love this question. We definitely are working with a lot of customers and customer success to understand the importance of utilizing individual donation forms for specific goals. A lot of folks will have a general fundraising donation form, of course, but then the question becomes, when should they be using different forms for different initiatives, different events, or different campaigns that they run throughout the year? And that's a lot of conversation that we tend to have. So being able to measure data on a per form basis allows you to tell that greater story. Rather than just sending people to a general giving form for a specific initiative or a specific event that you might run each year, it's much better to have a separate form that's ideally an individual landing page that's specific to that incentive, so that you can track that year over year, have data that is associated with that particular campaign, so that you have more leverage to tell a story around that particular campaign versus a general donation strategy.
I'd add to it. We've based on our research, we found there's what we'd categorize as 3 different types of forms. There's the general, which is the magic sorting hat, the catch-all. But then there's acquisition forms. If I'm paying for advertising, I want to drive someone to a very specific form, but the information that someone that has never engaged with my organization needs is wildly different than those that don't. They're longer. They include more copy because you need to do more time explaining and laying out the value prop. And there's campaign pages, like you mentioned. If I'm sending someone from an email talking about my year-end fundraising goals, that page should reinforce what they read in the email on the page too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's where a lot of folks miss the mark, because they'll spend a lot of time on email marketing or social media, but then where they're actually sending their donors, it doesn't line up. It doesn't feel like a very smooth experience to the donor. And that can be a really bumpy road for donors to actually make the decision, a split-second decision to make that contribution. What's going to make them feel connected is that smooth experience.
We actually have, we have some experiments that have proven even keeping imagery the same. If I feel like I'm on one website and I go to a different website and it looks wildly different, that can lead to a 10 to 13% fall off. Or if the message doesn't align, it's almost a 50% fall off. We make assumptions that when someone clicks donate, that they're committed to give. The reality is an average donation page maybe sees a conversion rate in the 30s, which means 70% of people that click on the donate button haven't yet decided to actually do that. And so anything we can do to smooth that process out is going to be helpful.
Absolutely. I feel like that's one of the main conversations I'm having with our customers too, is I'll see folks on board with Give and then they have their donation form that's all set up, ready to go. But that's the only thing on their donation page is just the form. And I'm like, I need more from you. I need to know what you're about. I need to know how I'm going to connect with your organization in a really meaningful way. You need to get people over the finish line once they land on that donation page.
You have to explain what's unique and appealing about your organization.
Yes.
One of the things we do is we publish all the experiments we run on our site. At this point, we have like over 6,000 published. But the 10% lifts, the 15% lifts, they come from making the page easier to use, adding security indicators. When you double revenue, when you triple conversion rate, that comes from nailing that explanation, explaining to someone the value and helping them feel like their gift is more impactful. That's where the big wins end up coming from most of our clients.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Just from even my own personal experience contributing to causes, being able to understand what the impact has been is just so much more personal. And it's a much more connected experience for the donor and the organization. Cool. So I don't think that there's any other questions. I appreciate everyone's questions and I appreciate your time, Kevin. It's been great to get to know you better, get to know your work, and all the amazing things that are being done with NextAfter. Thank you for being here today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Amanda. This has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, there's lots of helpful links in the chat, and this recording will be on YouTube, so you'll be able to catch a replay whenever you need to. Thanks, everybody.